First tonight, President Trump has hit out at Israel and Iran, accusing both of violating the ceasefire he'd announced only hours earlier. He said he was especially unhappy with Israel. Using a strong expletive, Mr. Trump said both countries had fought each other for so long they no longer knew what they were doing. His outburst followed Israel's announcement of imminent fresh strikes in Tehran after it said it had shot down 2 incoming Iranian missiles. President Trump subsequently posted that he had spoken to the Israeli Prime Minister and that the Israeli planes would turn around and that the truce was back on. But explosions were later reported in Iran. Correspondents say it was instructive that he took aim at Israel in particular, essentially giving Prime Minister Netanyahu an order to stop those attacks. But just days ago, he was celebrating with Mr. Netanyahu the success of the American attacks on those 3 Iranian nuclear facilities.
They violated it, but Israel violated it too. Israel, as soon as we made the deal, they came out and they dropped a load of bombs, the likes of which I'd never seen before. The biggest load that we've seen. I'm not happy with Israel. You know, when I say, okay, now you have 12 hours, you don't go out in the first hour and just drop everything you have on them. So I'm not happy with them. I'm not happy with Iran either. But I'm really unhappy if Israel's going out this morning because of one rocket that didn't land, that was shot, perhaps by mistake, that didn't land. I'm not happy about that. You know what? We basically have 2 countries that have been fighting so long and so hard that they don't know what the they're doing. Do you understand that?
Donald Trump. Meanwhile, European leaders have been reacting to the news that Israel and Iran have both confirmed they've agreed to a ceasefire. Germany's Chancellor Friedrich Merz says he hopes Israel's and America's military actions in Iran will dissuade Tehran from pursuing the goal of building a nuclear weapon. President Macron of France said the risk of clandestine nuclear enrichment by Iran was why negotiators should remain in contact.
Écoutez, la situation, on le voit bien, reste volatile.
As we can see, the situation remains volatile and unstable. I think it's a very good thing that President Trump has called for a ceasefire. As you know, this is what we have been advocating for from the outset. And so I think there have been some important and very positive statements calling on everyone to return to the discussion table and for the fire to stop. However, the last few minutes have shown that the situation remains very fragile, so it must be monitored with great vigilance. Everyone must exert maximum pressure for the fire to stop and for discussions to resume. This is about the region's stability, the lives at stake, but also the seriousness with which we can collectively resume the follow-up on the Iranian nuclear issue. Let me remind you that our common objective is to ensure that Iran does not acquire nuclear weapons. So, we need to regain control and transparency over the monitoring of their civilian programs. And it's also about restoring stability to the region. That is why, beyond what is happening regarding Iran, I reiterate here the need to achieve a ceasefire in Gaza and to resume humanitarian aid in Gaza. This is absolutely a priority.
Cessez-le-feu à Gaza et de reprendre l'aide humanitaire à Gaza.
Den Aufruf des amerikanischen Präsidenten zu einem Waffenstillstand.
We, therefore, welcome the US President's call for a ceasefire. If this ceasefire succeeds following the decisive military strikes by the US and the Israeli army against Iran's nuclear facilities in Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan, then it will be a very positive development that can make the Middle East and the world safer. We now call on both Iran and Israel to heed this call from the American president.
Aufruf des amerikanischen Präsidenten zu folgen.
The German Chancellor Friedrich Merz and before him the French President Emmanuel Macron. Well, for more on these stories, I'm joined now on the line from London by the international affairs analyst, Dr. Marek Laskiewicz. Thank you, Dr. Laskiewicz, for joining us. Do we know what the Israelis and the Iranians have been doing with regard to their attacks on each other, because it's been difficult to keep track of what has been going on in this conflict, whether it's escalating or de-escalating?
Right now, thanks primarily to President Donald Trump, there is a fragile ceasefire. It is true that in the run-up to the ceasefire, Israel took full advantage to attack Iran, and Iran, it would appear in its retaliation, overstepped the ceasefire deadline time, which Israel has responded with a minor attack because President Donald Trump said they should not press with their major attack. So right now, the good news is, and it is excellent news, is a ceasefire exists and it is holding.
And as you said, it's very good news indeed. And the reporting is that President Trump had called the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and asked him not to attack Iran. But it appears the Israelis did go ahead and attack. I mean, how do you reckon the Israelis feel getting that sort of tongue lashing from President Trump?
Well, it has to be said that it must be one of the most humiliating moments for Netanyahu, that he suddenly gets told of, like a little schoolboy, to stop it and to behave himself. Because that's in effect what President Donald Trump said. It would scarcely be said in a more humiliating way. And as a result, Israel agreed to the ceasefire, agreed, I think, to the terms on paper, but not in spirit initially, and now is towing the line. But for Israel and for Netanyahu himself, significantly a bad moment. Not a major bad moment, but annoying at least.
Absolutely. And for Donald Trump himself, how big a test is this? Because, I mean, he inserted himself thoroughly in this conflict with the US strikes over the weekend, and it is his brand and his reputation that is now stamped on the peace deal negotiations and the ceasefire that he thinks he's got agreed.
Yeah, it is a success for him. It is a very large success to have managed to halt the exchange of fire. He's also had a success in that his bombing of the Iranian nuclear facilities was replied very weakly by Iran. In fact, what we've learned, of course, is that Iran even warned the Americans so there would be no American casualties, which Donald Trump acknowledged. So from this point of view, it is a very good moment for Donald Trump, easily one of his more successful moments. The problem is, as you've indicated, what will happen now? Will the ceasefire hold? Well, that depends on the negotiations. What depends on the negotiations? Precisely what Iran has offered America, or at least accepted for America, to enable negotiations to open at all. And this, we don't know. And therefore, this will emerge in the next day or two, precisely what Iran is thinking of signing up to.
Well, I mean, if we take it sort of bit by bit, you mentioned sustaining peace in the days and sort of hours ahead. Is it all down to Netanyahu and his military commanders?
Primarily, it is down to Donald Trump whether he's willing to rein in the Israelis. The Iranians, they accepted the ceasefire first, and as far as one can tell, are likely to hold it. The question is, what will Netanyahu do? Because it's quite clear they have not finished the job. Worse, it's quite clear that the Americans have not, in fact, severely damaged the Iranian nuclear facilities to the extent they wanted to. And so from this point of view, it must be very tempting for Netanyahu to do something. However, please note, without American firepower, there's limited amount he can do in Iran. And so for this reason, he is likely not to breach the ceasefire. Iran certainly has been damaged quite substantially by the Israeli and American attacks, and is probably equally looking for some sort of ceasefire. So for the very least, for some time, we are likely to see a ceasefire for at least the next few days. The key question is, what did Iran sign up to? And that is what Netanyahu presumably is interested in as well.
And I mean, just on the back of what you were saying there, I mean, you did mention that, perhaps the Israelis, in order to be able to really hurt the Iranians again, would need American support. Because, I mean, it raises the question of the kind of thing that we've seen Israel doing in Lebanon, saying they have a ceasefire and then attacking whenever they want.
Yes, that is a problem with the Israelis. The key point here is that in Lebanon, they can indeed hit anything at will. And to be honest, their firepower, assuming they are supplied by the Americans, please note, we always assume the Americans will give Israel all the arms they need. Were they not to do that, which is, of course, the real veto that President Donald Trump holds, then they would not be able to get away with this in Lebanon. As for Iran, I think the key point is they know they can't do it by themselves. And in that respect, they cannot afford for Donald Trump, who is incidentally not known for a stable character, to suddenly walk away from the whole issue. So I do think that we will not see Israel indulge in the same antics as they have done in Lebanon over Iran. The ceasefire is likely to hold for at least some time until it's clear what Iran has signed up to.
So the assumption is that the ceasefire will generally hold. And if it does, in terms of what happens next, just to summarize, the obvious thing is a negotiated peace from here.
That is indeed a very long step. First and foremost, what did Iran sign up to? Next, the negotiations will start off on that premise, but then they have to go somewhere to where the Americans at least would like to see them. There is another aspect to all this. Quite what is Russia's role? Because Russia has 2 nuclear plants there, and moreover, they did meet Russia just recently. And so therefore, there are a number of imponderables before we get to anything like a peace treaty. What is far more likely is that it'll take some time to hammer out. But assuming Iran is willing to make concessions, some sort of peace treaty is possible. The problem is that if Iran openly states at some point it is not prepared to back away from some sort of percentage of enrichment, which is felt to be too high by America and Israel, who incidentally have stated they would like to see 0%, at that point the talks will break down and we'll then have war. But right now, the good news is they're talking.
And do you think that the Strait of Hormuz might be a bargaining chip for the Iranians?
Yeah, they actually have several bargaining chips. They have not only these missiles, which are capable of penetrating Israeli defenses and in also hitting American bases. They have the Straits of Hormuz. There's the whole question of their support for the Houthis or for the Hamas or Hezbollah. And there's other aspects too, which are kind of hovering in the background. Just how much they're prepared to support Russia or vice versa. So Iran is not without cards. However, all this is in fact secondary compared to the key point. What percentage is possible? And the whole talks, you may say, just hinge around that point.
Absolutely. And of course, Donald Trump on his way to The Hague for that NATO summit. I mean, we've heard the likes of Friedrich Merz and President Macron essentially congratulating him and saying that he's done a good job and so on and so forth in pulling off this ceasefire. You expect a sort of guard of honor for him from European presidents when he gets there.
I anticipate that for once you'll be greeted with some applause, yes. But you see, the key point is that NATO has never been short of applause for Donald Trump. It's just that Donald Trump is really not interested in NATO and the countries there. So, to be quite honest, I'm not sure he'll spend much time there either. If you remember when I said at G7, I thought he'd leave soon because I can't see the point. Well, they're essentially the same nations in NATO. Okay, a few more, but there's the same much of a muchness. The key nations aren't there, which are, of course, Iran. He's going to have Iran, Israel on his plate. There's the question of Russia, Ukraine, and in other words, and of course, there's China and Taiwan. These are the ones that worry him. being applauded by many people. Yeah, it's nice for a day. It's quite possible he may leave after a day, quite simply because NATO has nothing much more to tell him. As for the 5% GDP and so on, which is talked about, we'll see it when it happens. To be quite honest, when you read the accounts of many of these countries, they're not interested in 5%. And one has the impression that they'll sign up for anything just as long to have Donald Trump smiling at them. And afterwards, well, things just get delayed and nothing much happens.
Brilliant talking with you as always. Dr. Marek Laskiewicz is the international affairs analyst who was talking to me on the line from London.